Hey, everybody. This is Ed Friedman. I chair Friends of Mary Meeting Day. Thank you all for coming tonight. I know there's a lot going on out there, so we appreciate you joining us. I'm going to go through a few slides here about who we are, what we do, and so forth, and then I'll introduce our speaker. We are recording the program, so if you don't want to be recorded, you can, you can leave and you can watch the recorded version at a later date. If you have questions during the program, if you could use the chat feature, that would be great. And uh, I will probably be the one to moderate them at the end. And I just want to acknowledge and thank Martin McDonough, who's on the call as our primary web maintenance person and Zoom coordinator, and who is wanting to retire. So if anyone out there is savvy with either Dreamweaver or WordPress, please get in touch with either Martin or I. Currently, our website's in Dreamweaver, but Martin's been building another site in WordPress as one that will hopefully be easier for more people to manage. So, and I'll thank our speaker Jamie Banks for being here tonight. I know it's a big deal, and so we'll get going. Tell me, let's see, Martin, do you see the next slide?
Yes.
All right, great. So Friends of Mary Bay, a very unique organization, really countrywide, certainly in New England, in that we take a holistic look, a holistic approach to the environment, primarily through these four areas you see on the screen. I'm sure you all can read. Um, we we do a lot of innovative research. Uh, some great examples here. PFAS isn't on the screen, but we've been doing a lot with PFAS in the last couple of years. Um, multi-year circulation study of the bay. You can see that animated on our website, which is great. The bay is just such a unique natural resource, really worldwide. Um, we were using cage muscles to determine whether pulp mills were still discharging dioxins or not. Found PCB hotspots using that. Doing water quality monitoring since 1999. Um, and currently, and overall, often using our um, research to inform our advocacy, some of which is pretty hard-edged. A lot of the work we do is around, obviously, the rivers and the bay, so it involves passage of safe passage, sorry, of migratory fish, um, diagenous fish that need to spend some part of their life in salt water and some part of their life in fresh water. And these grisly photos show examples of turbine mortality. So when someone tells you that hydropower is green, um, don't believe it for a minute. This is one reason why. And right now, we're very engaged in the relicensing of the Brunswick Topsom Dam, the mouth of the Androscoggin, controls the whole flow up the river. And this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to improve fish passage because these federal energy regulatory or FERC licenses typically last between 30 and 50 years. And once they're issued, you can't really break into them very well. So it can change things. So we're part of a new coalition that we're working on, that Free the Andro Coalition. And if you go to our website and go to the video section, scroll down a couple of videos, you'll see a really good introductory video on the Andro and the problem there. So active education program, getting people outside, away from their devices. Do this a big event a couple of times a year, fall and spring bay days. And it's great when kids say, I don't want to stop, or I don't want to eat lunch. I want to be an archaeologist, you know. So this is providing a really important service. And us old fogies don't have a lot of time left here. And it's important that we teach the kids about what's out here and to appreciate it and to work to preserve it. We are a land trust, protected quite a bit of land in the area of the bay. Our focus has been not on trails, but on valuable wildlife habitat. There's a lot of trails around, a lot of land trusts do that.
Shut up.
Everyone should be muted. I just heard a moan for something from somewhere. I don't know what that was about, but anyway, we're working on a couple of big acquisition projects right now as well. And if you like the program tonight and want to refer anyone to it, if you go to our homepage, friendsofmarymeetingbay.org or FOMB.org, and scroll down the right side, you'll see an education section, and then you'll see a speaker series video links. And typically within a few days, Martin will have tonight's recording posted up in that section, and you can watch it. And here is the series for the year and the rest of the series. Next month, second Wednesday of each month, October through May, we have Slime Me. And to take some of the cryptic factor out of that, this is about those slimy things, slugs and snails and other gastropods that we have in Maine that people mostly don't pay any attention to, except when they grab one and they're in the garden weeding, or maybe see a giant one and want to put some garlic on it and try it. But a lot of these are invasive. And Karen Caluzzi from the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, she's an entomologist there. She'll be talking about the initiative to really look at particularly invasive gastropods and what we can do with them and so forth, how to identify them, who they are, what they do. So, and then a couple more, great programs after that. So tonight's speaker, Jamie Banks, is a healthcare and environmental scientist. She's got an extensive background in health outcomes and economics, environmental behavior, policy. And so she, speaking of holistic, she brings a very multifaceted perspective to her work. She founded Quiet Communities in 2013 to help find solutions to the problems of harmful noise and pollution that I'm sure many of us on the call are familiar with, and certainly many communities are. And I think that I honestly don't know about here, but there are many communities that have some sort of a noise ordinance. And I think that probably typically it's pretty gross generally in terms of what they regulate. At Quiet Communities, Jamie's assembled a really robust team of over 40 folks to help with operations and advice. She's the author of several peer-reviewed publications. She's a presenter at national and international scientific meetings and an invited presenter at local, state, and federal government hearings, as well as our speaker series tonight. In addition to a role at Quiet Communities, Jamie chairs the Noise and Health Committee at the American Public Health Association and is leading efforts to develop policy statements around noise and related pollution. Jamie holds a PhD in social policy and health economics from the University of Kent in the UK, and she's earned master's degrees from Dartmouth Medical School and MIT. And with that, I thank Jamie again for being here. Thank you, Jamie. And I will stop sharing my screen and you can start and have at it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ed, for that great introduction. And thank you, Martin, for doing all the technology-related work. I am very pleased to be here. I want to welcome you all to the presentation, and also a special welcome to some friends that I see here, some neighbors, some colleagues. So thank you for attending. With that, I think I'll start sharing my presentation. Okay. Okay, can everybody see that? I hope
Yes.
so. Ed, Martin, can you see the big screen?
Yes, it's good.
Okay. The title of my talk tonight is Quiet Equals Healthier, Addressing Community Noise. We toyed around with this title quite a bit. Making noise about noise was one of the possibilities, and actually this is making noise about noise, because you'll hear a lot about that, and a bit about quiet as well. Just to tell you what you're going to hear, I'm going to make an introduction to myself, to Quiet Communities, talk briefly about why quiet is important, give you some basic information about noise, talk about noise as a public health problem, as an environmental problem, give a little bit of history of noise policy in the United States, and then talk about the case of data centers and crypto mining. Now, I have lived in Massachusetts, but moved up to Maine about 9 years ago. Part-time, it's becoming more full-time. Have heard some whisperings about proposed data centers. And this is something everybody should be concerned about, not only because of the energy consumption, water consumption, air pollution, but they're noisy. So I'm going to talk about that, and hopefully that will be something of interest. So my background, as Ed just said, health outcomes, health economics, health policy, and environment. These are the organizations on the right that I belong to: the American Public Health Association, where I chair the Noise and Health Committee, the International Society for Environmental Epidemiology, and the American Heart Association. Quiet Communities, we're a national nonprofit organization. Our tagline is "Working Together for a Quieter World." We're largely a coalition of scientific, medical, and legal professionals. We also have some staff. We also have some community members. Our mission is to promote quiet as a valuable natural resource, work to reduce harmful noise and related pollution, and create quieter, more sustainable, and more livable communities. In terms of areas we work in, we really work in all areas, or mostly all areas that really become problematic when it comes to noise and related pollution. And we take an scientific evidence-based approach to understanding the problem, helping to advance solutions, and looking at things from a system perspective. Rarely is a problem of noise just focused on the source. There's other stakeholders that come into it, there's policy and so forth. So we try and look at things holistically. And again, not just complaining about the noise and the problem, but trying to find solutions where they're feasible. Our work is unusual because it sits at the juncture of policy, science, and community. Science is often done in a silo. You have all these results, there's publications in the academic literature, but unless you can bring them into real world settings, it can go into that literature and just die. So we want to make this practical. We want to be able to influence policy with the science and the experience of communities. We do a lot of different things. We do education and outreach, conferences, workshops, webinars, presentations, research, secondary research, a little bit of primary research. We try and assist communities. We're in a strange position of being almost the only shop out there. There are other organizations doing things, but this is not a crowded area where we have a lot of people working in it. We do different types of consulting work, provide expert testimony, and then work with investigative reporters, other journalists to create articles that are educational for the public on the topic. When we think about noise, everybody is exposed to noise on an everyday basis. And a lot of people just say, well, so what? You live with it and you don't even notice it. The communities that we tend to work with, we call noise impacted communities. And these might be communities, there's some examples here, communities that are experiencing hundreds of low-flying aircraft going over their homes. Their walls are shaking, their ears are humming, and they're getting this several days a week. This is because of a program called NextGen. It's the expansion of private airports, private jets, flight training schools, and so forth. There's communities affected by mining, gravel pits, data centers, as I mentioned, crypto mining, quiet restaurants. We would all like to see quiet restaurants, I believe. Restaurant noise has really become a problem. And my colleague Dan Fink here, that's really his primary interest. Leaf blowers, lawn equipment. We started with that program initially, but quickly expanded to address all sorts of noise. Modified vehicles, cars, motorcycles have become a problem. So these are examples of the kinds of communities that we deal with. So switching to quiet, we promote quiet as a natural resource because quiet matters. It matters to the health and well-being of all living things. It helps children think and learn. It helps us to be calm, thoughtful, and productive. It encourages civil, courteous interaction with others, and it connects us with nature. When I walk into a library, coming off the streets in a city particularly, you can almost feel that stress melt away and feel those benefits of quiet. And here in Maine, I think we're fortunate to have a lot of quiet spaces, and our challenge is to protect them. So I'll talk about some basic information about noise. We live in a noisy world. There's all kinds of sources: trucks, loud music, lawn equipment, cars, car traffic, road traffic, boats, construction equipment, industry, personal listening devices that people have plugged into their ears, and of course, aircraft, and there's more. A lot of these sources are related to fossil fuels. The terms sound and noise are often used interchangeably, but they actually mean slightly different things. Sound is what you can hear, and it is a physical wave phenomenon. When it becomes noise, it's when it's processed by the brain and that sound is unwanted or it's harming us. So Dan Fink was responsible, my colleague that's attending here, for really pushing a change in definition of noise from just unwanted sound, which makes it subjective, to unwanted and or harmful sound, to reflect the harms that can happen to health when you're exposed to noise. There's different ways in which noise can occur. It can be impulsive, like a gunshot, pickleball play. It can be continuous, like that coming from an air conditioning system, a heating system. And it can be the same broadband noise, equally distributed along a frequency spectrum, or it can vary. It can be continuous, but it might vary because of power inputs and so forth. You can have intermittent noise, like flights that happen every few minutes, intermittent and repetitive. There can be a single source or there can be many sources. It might be chronic, or it might be a single episode or a few episodes and then it goes away. And then there's the issue of whether it's predictable or unpredictable. The decibel is the standard metric for representing what's called the loudness of noise. Now, the decibel, if we just use decibels to characterize noise, we would not necessarily know the difference between a cello concerto at 80 decibels or a gas leaf blower running at 80 decibels. Now, we know that just that decibel metric is not representing the human response. It's more than decibels. Noise is actually a complex phenomenon. There's sound energy that is measured in decibels. There's the frequency spectrum. So, for example, low frequency sound is like bass tones that you can feel vibrating. A high frequency sound might be a screech, nails on a blackboard, subway brakes, and so forth. The pattern is also important. Is it going up and down? Is it staying the same? How long you're exposed to it also makes a difference. If it goes away after a minute, that may not be a problem. If it lasts for a half hour or for days, it could be a very different problem at that same decibel level. There's also aspects called tonality, roughness, sharpness, and dissonance that I'll talk a little bit about when we go into the example of the data centers. So understanding the different features of noise is very important to understanding its impact on humans and on the environment. Low frequency is present in most sources of environmental noise, and yet it is routinely ignored. The A-weighted decibel that's used to represent sound underweights low frequency components in noise. What that low frequency component of noise does, it allows the sound to travel over long distances and to go through walls and windows. So the importance of this is that people living in their homes cannot control their own acoustic environment. Closing doors and windows does not work. So the health aspects, just to start, some statistics. There's over 1 billion people worldwide that are at risk of hearing loss. A lot of this is young people who are using personal listening devices, going to loud concerts or other venues where there's loud sound. Over 100 million Americans, I think it's closer to 150 actually, are at risk of hypertension from everyday sound. When we think of noise, we automatically think of our ears. And there's a reason for that. That's a channel where sound comes through. The hearing health impacts include noise-induced hearing loss, tinnitus, or ringing in the ears, and hyperacusis, which is a hypersensitivity to sound that can be severe enough that it can actually cause pain. There's also, when you have hearing loss, noise-induced hearing loss or other hearing loss, you're at greater risk for falls, depression, social isolation, and even dementia because your brain is not being stimulated in the same way. There's, of course, reduced work productivity with people with hearing loss and reduced quality of life. Those hearing health impacts result from damage to the inner ear. What you see here on the left is healthy hair cells that are responding to noise coming in through the ear and the effect of noise damaging those hair cells. Now, that damage is irreversible. So once that's done, it cannot be treated, at least the way medicine stands right now. Hearing loss occurs from cumulative exposure. So for most cases, it's this everyday noise that causes this type of what's called sensory neural hearing loss. It's usually not one bang, but a lifetime worth of exposure to everyday noise or high decibel accessories like leaf blowers, car horns, traffic, movie theaters, and so forth listed here. It's less intuitive that noise has non-hearing health impacts, but these are very well documented. There are about 2,500 articles that talk about both hearing, but also largely non-hearing health impacts. They include cardiovascular disease and related mortality, metabolic disturbances, increasing risk of obesity and diabetes, increased anxiety and depression, degenerative neurological disorders like Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's. And then, of course, there's impaired learning, impaired cognition, and reduced work productivity and quality of life. These non-hearing health impacts are mediated by the body's stress response. There's a little organ in the brain called the amygdala that is responsible for processing emotions, processing stress. So what happens is that noise comes in through the ear. It activates the amygdala with emotions or responses like annoyance, sleep disruption, other cognitive and emotional responses. That in turn causes the body to produce stress hormones like cortisol, norepinephrine, which in turn activate the sympathetic nervous system, which is kind of our fight or flight nervous system, involuntary responses. And then from there, there's a process of oxidative stress and inflammation of blood vessels that causes high blood pressure, arterial plaques, and leads to increases in risk of heart disease, heart attack, stroke, cardiometabolic disease, anxiety, depression, and so forth. It turns out that nighttime noise has even more pronounced adverse effects. That's because it's disrupting the ability of the body to recuperate. And it's especially harmful when that noise is intermittent because it can interrupt and fragment sleep. It increases levels of stress hormones even more than in the daytime, and those physiological conditions that can lead to blood vessel injury and these long-term health effects. There's also secondary stressors that occur when somebody is in an environment, especially where they cannot get away from the noise. That sense of powerlessness, there may be frustration or anger at the lack of authorities to address or solve these problems or others. There might be fear of loss of property value. There could be concern for others in one's home. Within the population, there's certain groups that are more vulnerable to these health effects: infants, children, adolescents, veterans with PTSD, seniors, people affected with neurosensory disorders like autism, hearing disorders, attention deficit, and then pre-existing diseases, cardiovascular disease in particular. Noise has a negative impact on children's learning. This has been known for 40 years. Some very interesting pioneering research by our late colleague, Arlene Bronzaf, was done in the 1970s, looking at levels of learning in schools where classrooms faced the subway noise versus where they were on the other side of the building, and noticed these test score differences, and was able to show that, in fact, it was that noise that contributed to the lower scores. Noise is something that has a major impact and high costs. 15 to 62 million American adults, depending on the study you look at, and the age ranges they cover, have noise-induced hearing loss. 6 million young Americans, teenagers, have noise-induced hearing loss. The figure that I gave about hypertension, you can see it's 146 million at risk of hypertension due to exposure to everyday noise. If we were just to reduce average noise by 5 decibels, it's estimated that we would save almost $4 billion per year in care for noise-related hypertension and heart disease. When we add in work production losses, remedial education needs, that figure is going to increase by orders of magnitude into the hundreds of billions of dollars. Noise is also a social justice problem. The communities that are most burdened with noise are those that tend to be poorer and minority communities. This is because of the placement of airports, train facilities, factories in neighborhoods that really don't have a voice. It's very well known that noise is not just an annoyance or a nuisance. We hear noise talked about in those terms. It's really trivializing the seriousness of its health impacts and environmental impacts. The CDC makes a statement about it: continual exposure to noise can cause stress, anxiety, depression, high blood pressure, heart disease, and many other health problems like we just reviewed. The World Health Organization has recognized this for decades. Excessive noise seriously harms human health and interferes with people's daily activities at school, at work, at home, and during leisure time. It can disturb sleep, cause cardiovascular and psychophysiological effects, reduce performance, and provoke annoyance responses and changes in social behavior. Noise was first declared a public health hazard in the United States by U.S. Surgeon General William Stewart in 1968. You can see from the statement here that these effects have been known for decades. Aside from hearing loss, it's been demonstrated that noise from aircraft and other sources causes physiological changes, including cardiovascular, glandular, and respiratory effects, reflective of a generalized stress reaction. And let me just say that today, with all of the research that's been done, a lot of it in Europe, because research in the United States really lost funding in the 1980s, we understand the cellular and molecular mechanisms by which noise is affecting health in all these various ways. It's really quite astounding, the progress that has been made. So I'll mention briefly noise also as an environmental problem. Just like it affects humans, it's also stressing wildlife. It's disrupting, this is man-made noise, disrupting abilities to communicate between members of the species, finding reproductive partners, evading predators, and finding prey. It diminishes health and vitality. Excuse me. For instance, bluebird populations, it's been found that the shells are more fragile, they crack more easily. You're not getting survival rates typical of a normal bluebird population. All of this is with other stressors, of course, contributing to loss of biodiversity. I just thought I would put this up because it just happened to be sent to me yesterday and I was doing this, but this is an example. There's actually hundreds of articles on the impact of man-made or anthropogenic noise on various species, birds, frogs, reptiles, insects, whatever. So this is just an example here, and there's a website that you could go to if you're interested in reading about it, but there's many, many more articles that you can pull up. We used to, well, in 1972, the Noise Control Act was passed. This followed on to the passage of the Clean Air Act. There was an amendment to the Clean Air Act identifying noise also as a pollutant. And by 1972, Congress enacted the Noise Control Act, providing money for education and doing education itself through an office within the EPA, money for research, product labeling, enforcement of regulations, helping to develop new regulations, starting a quiet product program where government agencies would take the lead in identifying and purchasing quiet products, hoping that this would then trickle down to the private sector, assistance to states and localities, and then keeping up with the science. In 1982, that program that was created by the Noise Control Act was defunded, and all of this was lost. What we had in terms of leadership on noise for many years has been lost. So today we're in a world that is just getting noisier and noisier. The idea that legislation by states and localities would take over the role that the federal government once played just has not happened. People really don't understand noise. They don't know what to do. Their offices aren't funded. So it's really a problem that communities all over are struggling with. So why are we here? Growth in transportation, industrialization, urbanization, the growing use of personal listening devices and noisy indoor environments like restaurants and theaters is contributing to harmful exposure. People don't realize that their ears are getting damaged. Purveyors don't realize that the environments that they're creating can harm people. So awareness of noise and its adverse impacts is generally low. As I mentioned, noise is a poorly understood phenomenon. The metrics that are used to evaluate community impact are not sufficient, and they're actually disconnected from health and environmental outcomes. State and local legislation are often ineffective, and even when they're in place and they're good, they're often not enforced, and that happens for a lot of reasons. So I want to turn to this case example of artificial intelligence, data centers, and cryptocurrency mining. We have hundreds of billions of dollars being invested in creating these hyperscale data centers and crypto mines. I mentioned they are intensely energy consuming. Forgive me if you already know this. They're intensely energy consuming. They pollute the air. They use lots of water. All of those are tremendous stresses on communities. But what's talked about less, but is a very important effect, is the loud noise that comes from these facilities 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. For the AI data centers, that comes from cooling towers, diesel generators as power backups that get tested on a regular basis. In crypto mining, it's ventilation fans. There can be hundreds to thousands of these fans operating simultaneously. So you're not just getting noise from a single source, you're getting unsynchronized noise from all of these ventilation fans. And that causes all kinds of acoustic phenomena. They have that in both cases, there's that strong low frequency component to the noise. It's very poorly attenuated over air, ground, and water, meaning it doesn't lose energy as it travels. So it can sound almost just as loud a half a mile away as it does at the source, or if not somewhat lessened, but you can hear it very clearly. If you've heard gas leaf blowers, you may know this is true. Industrial lawnmowers, these are things that we experience in our everyday lives. You don't hear that same sound over distance with an electric counterpart, for instance, that you do with the gas equipment. And it's because of that low frequency in the gas equipment. I mentioned it readily penetrates windows and structures so that you cannot shut doors and windows and get rid of it. And it's very difficult to mitigate because low frequency sound has a long wavelength. It goes up and over barriers. And so if somebody says, if a factory or a data center says, well, we're going to put up barriers, there's ones that have spent millions of dollars doing this only to find out that they're not effective at abating noise sufficiently within the community. Low frequency noise is responsible for the majority of noise complaints. It causes distress at lower decibel levels than higher frequency noise. It's an underappreciated risk to human health with a greater negative impact on annoyance, sleep disturbance, and non-auditory health. And again, it's something that is not properly represented by the A-weighted decibel, which is the standard that is used both by industry and is in most ordinances in the United States. There's also, apart from low frequency components, there's something called tonal noise. And this is when there's components that occur within very narrow frequency bands. and it makes sound that is especially annoying. So what you see here is a frequency spectrum that has low frequency components, and it has these sharp tonal components that can maybe be a whistling, a hum, a screech, things like this that can be very, very disturbing. In communities, many of which are more rural communities where crypto mines and data centers have been established, these are the kinds of health effects that are reported consistently across communities. And I don't think I have to read them all. We've talked about a lot of them, but communities are really suffering. There's an excellent, at the bottom of this slide is an article in Time magazine about the situation in Granbury, Texas. And this happens to be a crypto mining facility, but it really will give you a very vivid picture of the impacts that crypto mine has had on that town. There's also an accompanying video. We have an advisor that speaks in that to the potential health effects, long-term health effects that are going to be facing this community. The other impacts that are not quite health but related, disruption of daily activities, loss of enjoyment of property, both within the home and outside the home, these feelings of powerlessness, they can't control things, feared loss of property value. In some cases, these are properties that have been in people's families for generations. And it just feels like their legacies have been stolen. And then impacts on other family members. We have situations where families have autistic children that will not live in the home in that community. Their parents have to drive them someplace to sleep in the car or take them to a friend or other family members so that they're not disturbed by the noise. And then, of course, animals, wildlife, environment. We know that in some of these communities, people complain that the birds have disappeared or that the elk that used to be in their backyard are not there anymore or they're in lower numbers. Farm animals have lost weight and are not eating. So there's really an urgent need to educate and raise awareness about noise. We're trying to do that. I'll leave you just with a couple of slides, and then I think we're getting to the end. So I had that earlier statement by William Stewart when he declared noise a public health hazard and recognized all of those effects, hearing and non-hearing effects from 1968. 10 years later, he stated, calling noise a nuisance is like calling smog an inconvenience. Noise must be considered a hazard to the health of people everywhere. So thank you posthumously, William Stewart. And then I'll just end with why quiet matters once again. Health and well-being, learning, calmness, thoughtfulness, productivity, civil, courteous interactions, and connecting us with nature. So thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to take questions.
Well, thank you, Jamie. That was excellent and informative. I have while we let a few things build up in the chat, and there are some comments here. Quick question. You had a slide about hair cells getting damaged. Were those cells in the ear? Yeah.
They're
Yes.
in the cochlea of the inner ear. And if Dan Fink is here and would like to comment on that, I'm happy to turn it over to him.
I just didn't know if you're like hair cells on my arm or my head or
No, they're hair cells within the inner ear.
okay. And I don't know if Dan wants to jump in. Otherwise, I have some other questions as well. But question around the Noise Control Act. Do we know why it was defunded? Was it lobbying efforts from gravel industry or industries that made noise, or a general lack of interest, or how did that devolve? Do you know? And then sort of a follow-up, is there, in the years that you've been sort of involved, 2013, are you seeing an increased awareness of the issue?
So with regard to the Noise Control Act, one of the members of our legal advisory council actually ran the noise control program, including in the year that it was defunded. And it was a decision made by the Reagan administration with its efforts to deregulate and cut government spending. And apparently there were some business interests involved. There's a bit of an inside story. And David Stockman basically drew a line to that line item of the budget and defunded it. It just happened like that.
Right. And do you think we are, in the time you've been involved, are you seeing increased awareness of the issue overall, or is it still pretty, quiet, no pun intended, issue?
Well, within our bubble, we're seeing quite
On
a
your,
lot of progress.
okay,
And we really want to keep networking because that's really the way for the word to spread and people to become aware. Most of the people that become aware of noise and its adverse effects are people that are affected, and we hear from them all the time. We do go into communities, we give presentations. There's more and more media articles out there. The New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Scientific American. So we are seeing this uptick in media attention. There's now a couple of fairly new books that are out. Clamor by Chris Burdick came out. There's another one by Nina Kraus, mainly focused on hearing disorders. And we know there's another one in the works. So I think we are seeing increasing attention. It's just not as rapid as we'd like to see it, of course, especially given these things that are happening where, with data centers, you have regulations out there, and those data centers are in compliance, technically in compliance with those regulations, but they're doing great harm to communities because they're not using the right metrics and they don't understand the nature of that noise.
okay, so I didn't realize that they were necessarily, didn't realize that they were, so these are data centers that are in compliance if the community that they're in has a noise ordinance, right? Or are there still federal standards that they need to comply with?
With regard to data centers, no, I don't think there's any federal jurisdiction, but you bring up an interesting topic because the Noise Control Act was never repealed.
No.
So it is still on the books.
Mhm.
We actually, as an organization, along with another plaintiff, brought suit against the EPA for not meeting its mandatory responsibilities under the law. And of course, it's a tough one. Even if we won the case, given what's happened with EPA, we have no idea what it means. But, we thought it was important to hold agencies responsible for what they have been mandated to do. These are non-discretionary responsibilities.
Mhm. I wonder, when we were talking the other day, so I've been very involved in the sort of electromagnetic field issues for quite a while, and that's those guidelines are set by um, um, the FCC, Federal Communications, but they're based on ancient science. They were, written in 1996 based on 1980s or 70s or 50s stuff, and they've not been changed since. And how many people on this call had a cell phone back then, and we weren't surrounded by it? And I'm going to guess that's a very analogous situation to what you're seeing in the world of noise. That you talk about other components in the noise spectrum, if, as it were, besides maybe the obvious ones. Plus, there's a whole lot more of it now. So we have a greater awareness now than what we had maybe in 1972. I don't know about the um, mechanical, if you will, audio components, and subsequent effects, both to nature and to us, physiologic, behavioral, whatever. And those noise control, words that are still sort of in effect have not been updated. Is that reasonable to say that what we have on the books is sort of out of date?
I think that's very fair. Our the FAA uses something called the 65 day night level average. And so, which means 65 decibel average sound level over the course of a day. And then they add those up over the course of a year. And so they have these noise contours that define, um, I'm sorry, I'm looking at Malcolm's decibel meter there. Um, these noise contours define homes that qualify for sound insulation to prevent loud aircraft noise. But that 65 decibels, even an average, is way too high. We know that that causes health effects. And it doesn't account for the number of flights. So, that 65 DNL is decades old. I think it first came out in 1972,
Yeah.
when people really didn't understand the effects of noise and the levels at which they occur. And there's so many other factors. If somebody pokes you in the arm 5 times, that's one thing. But if they just keep doing it, doing it, doing it, and they're doing it every day, that's something totally different. So these are people that are severely affected that have many, many flights going over their homes a day. And yet the 65 DNL is this average figure that they're using to define contours for insulation. So there's a lot of disconnect here, and there's a lot of old standards that seriously need to be updated.
Yeah, that makes sense. And sort of back to the EMF thing for a second, we have a similar situation in that the FCC guidelines are based on a 30-minute average, but it's the peaks that tend to bother people. And the peaks, just like it's generally worse. You get used to noise, but if the noise is fluctuating, that's often a lot more disturbing to the system, right? So our regulations are, yeah, are are the product of sausage making, right? They're not very good, you know. So, um, I have one more here, and that's, is there, through your website, which, you could tell us again what that website is, or others, um, is there a place where there's a ton of model ordinances for noise? In Maine, we have the Maine Municipal Association. They often have stuff like that. Are there a plethora of decent noise ordinances out there which communities could, draw on if they know where to go?
Some people would say yes, and some people would say no. The big deficiency that we see in noise ordinances is reliance on a metric that is not representing most environmental noise sources and the impact that they're having on communities, which is the A-weighted decibel and average metrics. So that's a general problem. The one of our colleagues, Les Blomberg of the Noise Pollution Clearinghouse, is more of an ordinance expert. He's located up in Vermont, but works all over the country. So he might be somebody that you would want to ask about that. And I know that there are efforts. I'm thinking particularly the state of Connecticut is trying to, or at least some of the towns are trying to develop ordinances that do account for these other noise characteristics so that they're more effective in protecting their residents.
Okay, thank you. Um,
Ed, could you just call on Dan? Because I know he's had his hand up here.
okay, yeah, I don't know how to, I'm pretty not, I'm not tech savvy. Last thing I saw, he was trying to figure out how to activate his microphone and camera. So Dan, go ahead. If you, I think you can unmute yourself, at your end, hopefully now, I'm not sure. That's sort of up to Martin.
I don't know why we can't hear Dan.
can't hear Dan. I will say, Jamie, while we're waiting, that I did send out a notice about this meeting to the Environment and Natural Resources Committee at the legislature in Maine, and I believe we have a member of that committee on here on the call who really likes your presentation, and will want to get a copy of it to hopefully pass on. He's actually asking,
Hi, Art.
is
I'd be happy to talk to the legislature. That's the kind of thing that we need to get the word out.
you see Art's note that. Okay, so Dan, I think you're unmuted.
Art is muted.
Are we, Dan, are you there? Malcolm, I think you
Dan's
unmuted.
talking away, but we can't hear him.
I just saw a picture of Malcolm come up for whatever reason. So,
Well, the reason is that Art is muted. That's why you can't hear him. And if he could just unmute himself, you could talk with him.
we have said that to him, Malcolm, so I'm not sure where. Go see if I can find him if on my little thing here. Oh, there, just so Dan, you appear to be unmuted here, but we're not hearing you. And we can't read. I can't read your lips, so I don't know why that is.
Jamie, can you say something about insulation and its effectiveness?
Okay, while we're waiting, Jamie, did you hear that from Peter? Can you?
Yes, I did. Hi, Peter. I don't know enough about it to speak with any kind of authority. I know that, again, the low frequency is very hard to mitigate. But, high frequency, I'm sure there's many types of sound insulation that can be effective at abating that type of noise, higher frequency noise, broadband noise. And broadband would be where you're not seeing, a lot of peaks or dominance of one section of the frequency spectrum, but a kind of equally distributed across the frequency spectrum. But I have colleagues that if you write to me or write to Ed, he can send me the question and I can find out for you.
Thank you.
Dan, I still see you as unmuted, but we're not hearing you at all there. I don't know if it's a microphone setting on your computer. Well, on my computer there is I have a Windows computer, but up on the top right, this computer happens to be a little thing that pops up with controls for audio and speakers and microphone, or a couple of those, and there's sound levels and there's on off. So I don't know, probably doesn't help you, but
He said he can't figure out how to unmute.
well, we've unmuted him, so I don't know how.
No, it's something with his microphone, probably. So I did want to say hi to Julie and Beth.
Okay.
Beth was my neighbor. Julie is another colleague.
Thank you for coming, Julie and Beth.
Where are they?
Don't know.
So who is this? Oh, so Dan is saying here, regarding data centers in Texas, the state noise level is 85 decibels. EPA says the safe noise level is 55. So if I understand it, that's a conflict between the very permissive state standard level and the federal level.
So there's the federal levels were never converted to quote standards because they never went through a economic and feasibility assessment to see if they were practical to implement. So they were never really institutionalized. What I will tell you about the difference between that 30 decibel difference between 55 and 85, is every 10 decibel increase in sound translates to twice the loudness, perceived loudness, in the human ear. So if you went from 55 to 65, you'd perceive something as twice as loud. So if you do 2 times 2 times 2, it's 8 times louder than what the community outdoor guidelines are from the EPA. That's standard in Texas. And that's an occupational standard that has issues that if Dan were here, if Dan could speak, he could talk to it, but it's a little complicated for tonight's purpose.
That's an interesting point. So thinking about the workplace so are there standards with OSHA, or are these just calculated levels that are recommendations basically?
They're OSHA standards. It is, and Dan, you can make a face if I'm getting it wrong, but it's a time-weighted average that 85 decibels over, I believe, an 8-hour day, and kind of making some assumptions about what the rest of the day, looks like in terms of noise level in order to get to that calculation.
Okay. And Dan is leaving us now here. But the decibel scale is logarithmic, so the 30 dB difference is multiple orders of magnitude greater than the
Yeah.
Texas.
There's sound energy. So it's 10 times 10 times 10 would be the difference in sound energy between 55 decibels and 85 decibels, but the perceived loudness is on the scale of the doubling, with each 10 decibel difference.
Okay. And Dan says OSHA standards are not appropriate for the public because occupational standards are for time limits, but we are exposed to noise 24/7, 365 from birth to death. Great talk, Jamie. Someone just asked about data centers in Maine. Did you mention a data center is looking to build here in Maine? And I know I mentioned to you that one had just been nixed over in Auburn. Are there lots of other proposals out there that you're aware of, or any that you're aware of?
I haven't been able to look at, I've just been kind of, hearing people mention some consideration of one in Wiscasset
Oh, that's right.
out on the water where that nuclear power facility was. And which is, to me, a terrible idea on the face of it, because that sound is going to travel over the water and preserve its energy. And I can't imagine anybody's going to want to live there.
Right. Well, I think that's a few good, a few web references here in the chat. There's a mention of back in the beginning here, mentioned someone recommending your YouTube stuff. There's a NIOSH. NIOSH has an application that measures, or an app that measures the decibel levels of sounds that you're hearing. This program is measuring at 75 to 80 dB. All right. So anyway, do you want to just throw out your Quiet Communities website, and then I guess there's a lot of appreciation here for the talk, and yeah, leave us with the website. Any parting words, and then we'll stop the meeting. And what I'll do is email you in a few days when this is uploaded to our website, and the link will be there, and you can, folks can share it.
Sure. So our website is quietcommunities.org, just the way it sounds, no space. And I just, we're a nonprofit organization. If there's any way you can support us, whether it's financial or otherwise, we're very appreciative. We're really trying to spread the word and raise awareness and escalate this issue to the level that it really deserves to be heard at.
Well,
So thank you. Thank you all so much for coming and listening, and for your questions.
And just to clarify, you welcome individual members to Quiet Communities or individual support, as well as institutional or group, correct?
Yes, we have a membership program, and then we just have, subscribers. So take a look. Our executive director is Trish Glass. she'd be happy to give you a call, talk with you about what we're doing, and engage with you in any way that you'd like.
Mhm. Okay, great. Thanks so much, Jamie. Thank you again, Martin, and thank you all for coming. And hopefully we'll see some of you next month to learn about slippery, slimy slugs. They're pretty quiet at least. Yeah. So, thanks.
Thanks, Ed, and thanks, Martin. And thank you, everybody.